All over quilting is another type of free motion quilting that takes one filler design and covers the entire quilt with it in large scale. Large scale means that we are expanding the size of the filler design so that there's around a half to 1 inch between the lines of quilting. You're probably wondering where I start and where I stop. So I do something called quadrant quilting when I stitch a quilt in an all-over fashion. What I do first is I stitch my filler design in a row, running from the middle of the quilt all the way to the edge of the quilt. I don't break thread. I really try not to break thread unless it's absolutely necessary. I'll take that row right back into the middle, simply rotating my quilt one time and stitching in another direction. So I'm back in the middle, and where do I go? I don't want to break thread again because I'm stitching in an all-over fashion. I want to cover as much of the quilt as I can with as few thread breaks as possible. So I'm going to stitch down, straight down to the bottom of the quilt. Again, I'm not going to break thread. I'm just going to stitch along the edge and come back up with another row of quilting, matching these rows up so it doesn't even look like I've stitched it in a row. I'll then take this row to the side and back and to the top and back. This has essentially broken this little quilt into 4 quadrants, and this works for any quilt, even a big quilt. It doesn't matter. You can use quadrant quilting on anything from a small quilt to a king size because it works on every single one of them. You're just simply breaking the quilt up into 4 quadrants. I now have 4 areas of open space. The next step is just simply filling those quadrants step by step. If I've left off here, more than likely this is the easiest quadrant to start on. So I'm going to again interlock my filler design with the row before it and stitch it all up to edge and all the way back in. Then I'll stitch it up, gradually filling my whole quadrant with that filler design. So the first step is to pull up your threads, and I generally tuck my threads behind my foot so that way they're out of my way. Now the stitch we're going to be covering this quilt with is called lollipop chain, and it's created by first stitching a straight line, then a circle, then going inside of that circle with an open spiral. So I'm leaving enough space for myself to get back out, and then I spiral my way back out by traveling against the edges, actually just echoing against the edges of the spiral that I came on the inside. Then I travel back along that straight line and branch out with a new lollipop in a slightly different direction. You can see I'm just simply stitching over all of these piecing lines, over all of the applique lines. You'll see me stitching over the appliques a little later in this video. But I'm really just simply ignoring everything. And when I was thinking about filming this, I thought about actually flipping the quilt over and stitching it from the back. Because in all honesty, when you're stitching a quilt in all-over quilting, that might actually be easier because the shapes and the piecing lines wouldn't distract you so much. Because you really are ignoring it all. And it really doesn't matter if you were to stitch this from the back. So you can see how I'm just kind of branching out very randomly and occasionally traveling along these straight lines to create my lollipops. And with all-over quilting, it seems your safety pins really can get into your way because you're moving a lot faster and you're moving in all different directions. So definitely keep an eye out for the safety pins that you can remove and get those out of your way really quickly. Now I've sped the video up, of course, so that way you can see this filling a little quicker across the side of this quilt. And you can see that I'm working this in more or less a row. I'm not really just randomly veering out in all different directions. I am kind of working this in about a 4-inch row, working across that sashing line into the top and bottom of both of those blocks. And the row is going to help, and here you can see it a lot better from this perspective. By working this into a 4-inch row, I have a lot more control over where I'm going. I'm working generally from the center of my quilt to this edge here, And by working it into a row, I can really easily control how far I'm stitching away from my starting area, my starting line, that sashing line. I can keep everything under control, and really there's a lot less shifting of the quilt. If you compare this video to the Stitch in the Ditch video, you'll notice immediately that I'm not turning my quilt hardly at all in this situation. I'm simply stitching on one level plane from one direction, from the left to the right, working consistently. And the only reason I really have to stop is to take out pens. So it's a lot quicker, and it feels a lot quicker. I think in my into the Stitch in the Ditch video, I complained a little bit about the stitching in the ditch seeming to take forever and seeming to take a lot longer than it really actually took. It seemed to take longer because it wasn't very much fun. And this is a lot more fun and a lot more freeform because it gives you the opportunity to play with filler designs and really have a little bit more creativity with your free motion quilting. The wonderful thing about Lollipop Chain, and the reason I decided to stitch it on this beginner quilt, is because Lollipop Chain is a very unique free motion quilting design. It has the properties of an independent design, so that means that it can go in just about any area of your quilt. It can also expand to any size, so you can stitch your lollipops even double or triple the size of mine, or you could stitch them a lot smaller. When I first stitched Lollipop Chain on the project, they were stitched on a 1/4 of an inch scale. So you can stitch them any size that you want, and they can freely fill an area very easily. You can also see that there are two techniques that we're really practicing whenever we stitch Lollipop Chain, and they are travel stitching, and that's traveling right on top of your stitching when you're stitching the straight lines. And this is a very necessary technique to learn in free motion quilting because that really gets you from one area of the design to another. You're also, as you spiral into and out of your circle, you're practicing echoing, and that is also a technique you really have to master for free motion quilting. So for the next video in this series, please go to freemotionquilting.blogspot.com.